Good morning, everyone, and welcome back into Alive Now from Fox, continuing to bring you all the latest on the man charged in the murders of 4 University of Idaho students. Joining the program now is Dr. Carole Lieberman, a forensic psychiatrist, a trial expert witness, and she's also a body language expert. So, Dr. Carole, thank you so much for joining the show and offering your context and analysis. I do want to begin with the video that shows Kohberger walking to the courtroom. He's wearing that red jumpsuit, and I would love to play it and see if you could maybe offer a little bit of analysis, maybe some red flags that you're seeing. Let's go ahead and take a look.
Yeah. Well, that actually is him walking in the halls of the court after he had spoken to the judge. And, he has this deadpan look. Most of the pictures and video that we see of him he has this deadpan look at his people who knew him, or even his current classmates said he has this. That's how he is. In this picture, that's when he's walking to the courthouse, and you see that he looks for a second at the reporters. They're calling to him and asking him, why did you do it, and so on. And but other than that, he then quickly looks straight ahead, turns toward the courthouse, and has this robot-like walk. And the only time that we have seen him, other than this kind of robotic sort of face, in these court pictures, though, you do see some indication of his anxiety. For example, his biting his lip, in walking in the hall. In the other picture, he was blinking some. Those are some indications of anxiety. But the main picture, video where he looks other than deadpan is the one where the second arrest, well, not really an arrest, but where the police stop him in Indiana, he and his father driving to Pennsylvania, and he looks at the policeman and he is panic-stricken. He has a panic-stricken face. Yes, there we go. That because he doesn't know whether the police know that he is the one who committed the crime, or is going to be accused of committing the crime. And they didn't at that time. They didn't know about the license plate and so on of the car, but he didn't know that. And clearly right there, he's expecting maybe this is going to be it. This is going to be the arrest. And his father, in contrast, his father has this very strange affect. He tells the policeman about some crime that happened in Washington, not the 4 students who were murdered, and how his son is going to school in Washington. Very strange. I think we're beginning to see that a lot of strange things about his father. Like at the courthouse yesterday, he wore these strange clothes, not appropriate really for going to court where your son is being accused of murder.
It's interesting that you mentioned the father. Do you think that perhaps he had some knowledge about his son possibly committing these crimes?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that. I think, the father is perhaps in denial, but it's so strange that he would fly to Washington right after the crimes and drive back across the states. Was this on the father's bucket list that he wanted to go cross country? Did he hear something in his son's voice that sounded a bit off and he was worried about his son driving all the way? Or did he have some inkling about the son? He had to have heard about the white Elantra. He knows that his son has that car. He drove all the way in that car. Perhaps even when the policeman stopped him, that was the father's nervousness, talking about all of these things, that perhaps the father also was worried that the policeman was going to arrest his son.
So let's talk about the court hearing that took place yesterday, because there was something interesting that happened. Kohberger, mentioned that he does not have a mental illness. When asked by the judge, he said no, he doesn't have a mental illness. How could this possibly play out in future court hearings and proceedings?
Yes, I mean the judge. That's a normal thing for the judge to ask. She has to make sure that the defendant is in of sound mind when he's agreeing to extradition. Which was what the hearing was about yesterday. So that was the question. Is there anything? Do you suffer from any mental health diagnosis or take any prescribed medication that would interfere with your being able to consent to waiving extradition? And he said no. Now. He said that presumably because he wanted to be extradited and get to Idaho, and probably to see the what was written up in the arrest warrant and so on, for why they, what they suspect about him. But his defense attorney, who he's going to get in Idaho, will most likely try for an insanity defense, which, as an expert witness myself, a psychiatric expert witness who has been hired by the defense oftentimes, for a psychiatric defense and not guilty by reason of insanity or something where you can prove that the person didn't have the intent to kill. So that is going to get in the way of this future probable defense. But there is no way that, now I haven't examined him, but it does not seem to me, certainly I've studied this case, it does not seem to me that he would be appropriate for not guilty by reason of insanity. He knew what he was doing when he committed that crime. I've talked about how he's an incel. Besides whatever other psychiatric problems he has, I think the main motive for this was that he is an incel and involuntary celibate who was enraged at these 4 students for being Stacy's and Chad's, what incels call the beautiful people, the people who they think wouldn't give them the time of day. And so, but that does not mean, that isn't a defense for, when he killed them, he knew what he was doing. And that's the thing. Did the person know the nature of his crime? And did he know whether it was right or wrong? And he did, for sure, at the time.
So let's talk more about his background and his past. We're still learning a lot, but based off of what has been revealed thus far, have you noticed any personality indicators that maybe could have foreshadowed this event? You mentioned the likelihood of him being an incel. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit further on that and other things that you've noticed throughout this course of getting to know about his background that could have possibly been indicative of these murders.
Sure. Well, for one thing, an incel is a man who has had a long history, really from the first time that they showed interest in a woman. Or these are men who feel unfairly deprived of women wanting to have sex with them or wanting to date them, because they've been rejected all along. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. They build up rage as they get rejected more and more. And we don't know we do know, there are things that have come out that kind of support that characterization of him. The fact that his cell phone was found pinging in the same places as these 4 students were, especially Kaylee. When he was young, when he was in high school, and he was overweight and he was considered a nerd and so on. But more than that, the girls bullied him, high school girls bullied him, threw things at him. And it went from there. A bar in his neighborhood in Pennsylvania talk about how the owner of the bar had to talk with him because he was he was harassing the women, the staff, and the customers, trying to get them to, pay attention to him, to go out with him, and so on. So there's a history of that. There's a subculture on the internet of these incels. The most famous incel was Elliot Rodger in 2014. He's the one who shot and knifed and ran over with his car a bunch of students at UC Santa Barbara. And he's sort of the incel hero. Now, the incels have already, just recently, they have started a free Brian Kohberger campaign. So they recognize him as one of them. They feed each other's rage. And that, the reason when I started talking about this at the beginning, because when they described the crime scene as so, not just knifing, stabbing, which is very personal, but the fact that it was so brutal. And that is because he unleashed on them, in my opinion, all of the rage, that he has been storing up in his 28 years. And, obviously he has some other psychological problems as well. But, and we, of course, we haven't learned very much about his family. And, other than what we saw, we know one of his sisters is a psychologist. We know his father went bankrupt in 2010. I would say that probably the family member who influenced him most in a negative way was his father, but we can't really say, I don't know anything more about him other than that he went bankrupt. But, perhaps there's some mental illness in the family, but we don't know that yet. We do know one thing that was interesting was that after the murders, the students in his criminology class talked about how he changed, how now he was more talkative, he was animated. And I had predicted that, I was talking about what people should look for if they think if they're trying to help find the killer. And I said one of the things to look for would be a change in personality. He would have been introverted before the killings and then become more extroverted afterwards, because he would feel so proud of himself that he had gotten rid of some Stacys and some Chads, the beautiful people who the incels hate.
So let's talk more about his field of study, because we do know that he was studying criminology and criminal justice, I believe. Does this offer any insight into a motivation, possibly?
Yes. I think that his studies, first, he studied psychology as an undergrad and then criminology to get his master's. And then, of course, he's in this PhD program in criminology. I think it was two things. One, he was struggling with the demons inside of him, the murderous demons inside of him that wanted to commit a crime. He was struggling to try to damp those down, calm those. But on the other hand, at the same time, he was also trying to learn what he could about criminology and criminals and how to commit the perfect crime. I think that's what he was trying to do. He had these two impulses fighting with each other, and apparently the one where he wanted to commit the perfect crime won. And I think part of it, there's been talk about his teacher, who is a famous criminologist who's written a bunch of books and so on, and has collaborated with the BTK killer. And I think part of him, he wants to be his own book. He wants to have books about him. And I think he also fantasized about writing a book with this teacher about him and his crimes.
Wow. Anything else that really stands out to you with this case? And we've been trying to figure out what the connection could possibly be between the suspect and the four victims, but now you're giving us more insight into that. Anything else that really stands out?
Well, talking about that, Kaylee's father had said that she told him that she had a stalker. And and even there's a shopkeeper in the town in Moscow, and where he said that her friends told him that they would walk behind her because she had a stalker. Now, why nothing more was done about that? But they should have listened to her father, really. But there's so much. What else? In his studies of psychology and criminology, that is what Ted Bundy did. Ted Bundy studied psychology first, and then he studied not criminology per se, but he studied law. And he studied that in Washington. And so it made me wonder whether, in fact, Brian Kohberger was following or trying to follow in Ted Bundy's footsteps and go to Washington to study criminology, in the same kind of way. The main difference, though, between the two of them is that Ted Bundy was not an incel. He was a charmer. He had women. He could get women. He did get women. That's how he was able to kill a lot of the women, because they came with him. They were attracted to him. So, it is kind of, I wonder if it's just a coincidence that he went to Washington, or he really, especially since he was studying criminology, he knew about Ted Bundy, so perhaps doing that on purpose.
So next, United States Marshals will extradite him back to Idaho. That's when we'll learn more details about the murder, and we'll touch base with you as soon as that happens. Thank you so much for joining us.
Very welcome. Thank you.